The evidence box had 41 photographs. No negatives, no narrative report, no officer of record. Just a field, a body, and a photographer's shadow that should not have existed. At first I thought the light was wrong. Then I looked closer. The shadow was turning toward the camera. And the more it turned, the more it started to look like me. The photographs are the only part of this I can still hold in my hands, so I will start with them, and I will tell you what they show. And then I will tell you why what they show cannot have been photographed by anyone. My name does not matter much to this, but my work does, so I will say that I spend my days outdoors and on my feet. I am a forensic photographer's assistant turned independent scene photographer, which means that for 2 decades, the county contracted me to photograph crime scenes, accident sites, recovered remains, and the slow open-air aftermath of things that happen to people in fields and ditches and the backs of properties where the nearest streetlight is a mile off. I am not a detective. I do not solve anything. I stand where I am told to stand, and I make a true and complete visual record of a place exactly as it was found, and then I leave, and the place goes on without me. I am good at it because I notice light, and I notice when light is wrong, and that is the whole of why I am the one telling you this. A detective reads a file. I read a photograph. And the photographs in the Marrow Field Box were wrong in a way that only someone who has spent 20 years making photographs would feel in the back of the neck before the mind catches up. I want to be careful and slow here, because the only thing I have to offer is precision. And precision is the only thing that ever kept me steady in this work. I have photographed things that would unmake most people. The way I survived it was never by looking away. It was by looking so closely, so technically, that the horror became a problem of exposure and framing and depth of field, a craft problem, a set of decisions about light. You can stand over almost anything if you are thinking about your aperture. That is the trade secret of my whole profession, and I am telling it to you now because it is also the reason the Marrow Field Box reached me in a way it would not have reached a detective or a clerk. They read for facts. I read for light. And the light in those prints was the first thing that was wrong, long before I understood anything else. In the spring, I was hired not to photograph a scene, but to do something I had never been asked to do before, which was to re-photograph and digitize an old physical evidence collection so it could be entered into the county's new electronic system. Budget work, cleanup work, boxes of old film prints and negatives going back 50 years, sitting in a climate-controlled storage unit the county rented out by the bay near the rail spur because they had no room for them anywhere proper. The county had spent 2 years and a great deal of money building a new digital evidence platform, and now they had thousands of old physical items that existed nowhere in it. And an auditor somewhere had decided this was a liability. And so the contracts went out to people like me to turn shelves of paper into clean scans before the next fiscal year closed. I was the natural choice for the photographic boxes. I knew how to handle prints. I knew how to copy stand them without glare. I knew the difference between a fiber print and a resin-coated one, and how each one behaved under lamps. And I worked cheap because the season was slow and the rains had kept the outdoor work down. The arrangement was simple. They gave me a key to the one storage unit, a list of case numbers, a laptop with a login to the county's older digital records so I could match what I scanned against what was already in the system. In 3 months to turn shelves of paper into clean files. So my setting for all of this, I should be honest, was not anything grand. It was a metal storage unit with a roll door, a folding table, 2 lamps on stands, a copy stand with a leveled glass platen, a color chart, and the smell of warm dust and the bay coming in under the door when the wind turned. There was a space heater I ran in the mornings because the metal held the cold, and a thermos and a radio I did not turn on because I liked the quiet. I want you to picture how ordinary it was, because everything that happened in that ordinary place, in good controlled light, with no one else there. And that is what I cannot get out of myself. There was no fog, no storm, no abandoned hospital corridor. There was a folding table and 2 lamps, and a man past 50 doing patient work he had done 1,000 times. And that is where it found me. The case numbers ran in sequence, and most of the boxes were exactly what you would expect. Faded prints of fender benders from the 70s. The cars boxy and the chrome bright, even in black and white. A drowning. The dock in the dark water and the recovered shape under a sheet. A barn fire. The timbers fallen into a black star shape. Smoke still ghosting off the wreck in some of the frames. Sad, settled things. All of them closed decades ago. The people in them long dead or long moved on. I developed a rhythm. Open a box. Check the contents against the manifest taped inside the lid. Lay the prints out in order on a clean black cloth. Set my white balance against the color chart. Photograph each print, flat under even light. Log the new file with the case number and the print number. Return the print to its sleeve. Reseal the box. Sign the digitization log. Next box. I could do 30 or 40 prints an hour once the rhythm took hold. It was for the first 3 weeks the most peaceful work I had done in years. There is a meditative quality to it, the same gestures over and over, the soft click of the shutter, the small click of the print going back into its sleeve. I slept well those weeks. I want that on the record. Whatever I am now, I came into this rested and content and entirely without the kind of imagination that invents things in the dark. The Marrow Field Box was out of sequence. That was the first small thing, and at the time it was not even a worry, only a note I made to myself. The case numbers ran in a clean ascending line, decade by decade, and then there was a box whose number did not belong in that decade's range at all. It was a much older numbering format. 4 digits and a letter prefix, the kind the county stopped using before I was born, before there even was a county record system as such, back when these things were kept in ledgers in a courthouse basement. It had been shelved among the 70s boxes anyway, the way a single book gets shoved onto the wrong shelf in a library and stays there for a generation because no one ever has reason to pull it. The cardboard was older than its neighbors, a heavier stock. The corners soft with age but not water damaged. The manifest taped inside the lid was typed on a manual typewriter. The letters punched unevenly into the paper, some keys striking harder than others. The lowercase e sitting slightly above the line the way a worn type bar will sit. It listed the case only as Marrow Field Recovery, with no year, and below that a content list. 41 photographic prints, no negatives, no narrative report, no officer of record. No officer of record? That is the second thing, and it is the thing the whole story turns on, so let me explain why it stopped me even before I looked at a single print. Every evidence item that exists because someone collected it. That is the entire principle, the foundation under everything I've ever done. A photograph in an evidence box is there because an officer or a technician stood at a place and made it and logged it and signed for it. That Signature is the thread that ties the image to the world. It is called the chain of custody, and it is not a formality. It is the difference between a photograph and a rumor. In court, a photograph with a broken chain of custody is worth nothing because no one can swear it shows what it claims to show. The whole architecture of my profession exists to keep that thread unbroken. The logs, the signatures, the sealed bags, the initials across the seal so you can tell if it was ever opened. A box of 41 crime scene prints with no officer of record is like a letter with no sender and no postmark that is nonetheless sitting in your mailbox, already opened in handwriting you half recognize. The prints existed. Someone had to have made them. Someone had stood in a place and raised a camera and pressed a shutter 41 times. The box simply declined to say who, and in 20 years I had never once seen the line for officer of record left blank, because the system does not let you create the record without it. The record cannot exist before the person. That is the rule. That is the rule everywhere, in every system I have ever touched. I told myself it was an old record-keeping failure. The format was ancient. Paper gets lost, ledgers burn, courthouse basements flood, and the early decades of any archive are full of gaps where a name should be. I have seen worse. I have seen entire cases reduced to a single index card. So I made my note, out of sequence, no officer of record, predates standard numbering, and I lifted out the prints, expecting nothing. They were black and white, on heavy old fiber paper, the real silver gelatin kind that has weight and a slight sheen, and a tooth you can feel with a fingertip. And they were in beautiful condition, far better than the 70s prints I had been copying all month. Which surprised me, because by the numbering they should have been older than any of them. The paper had not yellowed. The corners were sharp. The blacks were still deep and the whites still clean, no silvering, no foxing, no fade. Whoever printed them had been good, very good. Better than the routine police work of any era I knew. There is a difference between a competent record print and a print made by someone who loves the craft, and these were the second kind. The tonal range was gorgeous. The dodging and burning had been done with a real hand. I have made prints my whole life, and I could not have done better. And I felt, looking at them, the small professional jealousy you feel when you see work that quietly exceeds your own. And the scene they showed was a field. A wide, flat field, knee-high grass moving in a wind I could almost feel. A tree line at the far edge. An overcast sky with that high, even light that photographers love because it has no shadows to fight. The kind of light that makes everything sit in its true tone. The first several prints were establishing shots, the way I would shoot them myself. Wide views from the edges of the field working inward. Each one stepping closer to a low rise in the grass near the center where something had been found. This is exactly how a scene is photographed. You establish context first, the whole field, the approach, the landmarks, so that anyone looking later can orient themselves and understand where everything sits in relation to everything else. Then you work inward, closer and closer, until you reach the thing itself, far to near, context to detail. It is a grammar, and every scene photographer speaks it, and whoever made these spoke it fluently, more than fluently, with a kind of grace. I knew the grammar of it because it is my own grammar. Whoever made these knew the job the way I know the job, from the inside, from the hands, And then I reached the detail prints, the close work near the rise, and I stopped because in the grass, in the center of the field, there was a person lying as the recovered are found. The particular stillness that is not sleep and not rest, and that I have learned to recognize from 100 yards. And standing over the person at the edge of frame in 3 of the prints, partly turned away, was the photographer's own shadow falling across the grass. That is normal. Photographers cast shadows. You learn to keep yours out of frame, to put the sun behind your shoulder or to step around it. But in flat, overcast light, it can be hard to even know where your shadow is, because there usually isn't much of one. A shadow at the edge of frame means only that the sun, however faint, was somewhere behind the photographer. I noted it. I almost moved on. I had logged hundreds of prints that week, and my hand was already reaching for the next sleeve. What stopped me was that the shadow was wrong for the light. The field was lit by high, overcast, shadowless, the flat, directionless gray that gives you no sense of time of day at all. The sky a single sheet of soft cloud. There was no source in that sky for a shadow, that long and that sharp. A shadow like the one in those 3 prints needs a low, hard sun, a sun close to the horizon, early morning or late evening, throwing everything long across the ground in a single, decisive direction. The grass in the photographs was lit by noon overcast. The shadow falling across it was lit by a different time of day entirely, a different sky, a different hour. The body of the field and the shadow standing in it did not come from the same light. And I have spent 20 years learning that this is the one thing a photograph cannot fake on its own. Because light is the one thing a photograph is actually made of. A photograph is nothing but a record of light. The grass remembered a flat gray noon. The shadow remembered a low gold evening. Both were in the same frame, on the same paper, in the same grain. I have never seen that. It is not possible the way a thing is simply not possible, like a number being both even and odd. I want to be honest about my own mind here because the slow way I came to understand this matters more than any single shock. And I do not want to pretend I leapt to the truth because I did not. I crawled to it backward, fighting it the whole way. My first explanation was double exposure. A frame shot twice, 2 moments laid over each other. One with the body in flat light, and one with a figure at another hour. It happens with old cameras, a frame not advanced, 2 scenes stacked on one negative. But a double exposure ghosts the whole frame. The grass would have doubled, the tree line would have doubled. There would be transparency everywhere. The 2 images overlapped, and there was none. The field was solid and singular. Only the shadow belonged to a different light, and it was not transparent, it was opaque. It lay on the grass like a real shadow lies, darkening what it covered. So then I thought, retouching. Someone painted the shadow in the darkroom, dodging or handwork on the print. But you do not retouch a shadow into a police evidence print. There is no reason on earth it would destroy the print's value, and besides, the shadow was not painted, it had grain, it had the fine random texture of real silver, responding to real light, falling on real grass, edge detail that no hand could fake, individual blades of grass darkened within it. It was photographed. It was not added. It was light that fell on that field and was recorded by that paper. Light from an hour the rest of the photograph did not share. I set those 3 prints aside in their own sleeve, separate from the others, And I went through the rest, all 41, slowly now, my rhythm gone. And the rest is what turned a curiosity into the thing I now carry and cannot set down. The establishing shots, the wide views of the field. I recognized the field, not in general, not as a type of field, specifically. The tree line had a distinctive break in it, a gap where two larger trees stood apart from the rest, twins almost, leaning slightly toward each other so that the gap between them made a shape like an open pair of compasses, and there was a fence post leaning at a particular angle in the foreground of one wide shot, an old corner post with the wire long gone, canted over it, maybe 30 degrees. And there was a low place in the land, a shallow swale, where you could see the grass grew darker and thicker, because water gathered there. I knew that field because I had photographed in it years ago. A different case, a recovered set of remains in a field outside a town called Hessom, a farmer turning up bones with a disc harrow. And I had stood at the edge of that exact tree line between those two leaning twin trees and shot wide to near just as these prints did. And I remembered the leaning fence post because I had used it as a foreground element to give the wide shots depth the way you do. I went home that night and pulled my own old work order, to be sure, because memory is a liar, and I have learned never to trust it without a document. And I was sure. The field in the Marrow Field Box was the field outside Hessom. I had been there. I had stood where the photographer stood. I had photographed it, but not this. Not this body, not this day, not these prints. My case in that field had been a set of skeletal remains. Old bones. No flesh. Found by a farmer and excavated over 2 days by an anthropologist while I documented every stage. And I had photographed all of it under a bright, clear sky in high summer, hard sunlight, sharp blue shadows, logged under my own name, signed in my own hand, closed years ago and entered into evidence, and as far as I knew, never reopened. The prints in the Marrow Field Box showed the same field under flat overcast in what looked like a different season. The grass a different height, with a freshly recovered body that was not skeletal at all but whole, recent, the stillness recent, and a photographer's long, wrong shadow standing over it, and no officer of record, and an impossible case number from before the county used numbers like mine on paper that should have been older than I am but looked newer than prints from the 70s. So I had a box of photographs of a real place I had personally stood in, showing an event that did not match the event I had documented there, made by no one the records would name, lit by 2 different times of day at once. And I am the person whose entire professional purpose is to certify that a photograph is a true and complete record of a place exactly as it was found. That sentence is on every report I have ever signed. A true and complete record of the scene as found. I did not know what to certify. The photographs were technically perfect and substantively impossible. They were the best work I had ever seen, and they could not exist. I did the careful thing, the only thing I know how to do when the ground tilts, which is to go find solid documentation and stand on it. I went looking for the original Hessom case, my own case, to anchor myself in the one part of this I knew was real, because I had made it real with my own hands. I still had the laptop with the login they had given me for the digitization project. Access to the county's older digital records so I could cross-check what I scanned. I pulled my Hessom file, and there it was. All of it exactly as I remembered making it. My photographs, the bright sky, the hard blue shadows, the skeletal remains, the anthropologist's gloved hands, the scale marker beside the bones, the evidence placards numbered in sequence, my name on every image, my narrative report in my own dry, careful language, a true and complete record of the scene as found, the chain of custody intact, my signature on the seal. It was solid, it held. I felt my shoulders come down from around my ears, and I almost closed the file. And I am glad and I am sorry that I did not, because something made me scroll to the end, to the supplemental materials, the way you check the last pages of a thing out of habit, stapled into the back of the digital file, in the supplemental section where later editions go, was a scan I did not recognize. A scan of a typed page on a manual typewriter. The same uneven punch as the Marrow Field manifest. The same lowercase e writing above the line. The same worn type bar. It was a recovery summary. It described the discovery of a body in a field outside Hessom. It described the body as freshly deceased, recently dead. The language clinical and specific in a way that the discovery of old bones never is, mentioning condition and position and the disturbance of the grass. It gave a date, and the date was 4 years after my own Hessom case had closed. 4 years in the future, from the file's own last modified timestamp, which sat right there in the metadata. The date the file had last been touched, years before the date written into the document stapled inside it. A recovery in the same field that, according to the document, had not happened yet, attached to a case that had been closed and sealed and untouched for years. I want to slow down on what that did to me because it was not fear. Not yet, it was vertigo. The specific dizziness of two true things that cannot both be true, sitting in front of you and refusing to choose. The Marrow Field photographs were not photographs of the past. They were photographs of a recovery in the Hessom Field that, per the document attached to my own old case, was dated 4 years ahead of when the file was last touched, which was itself already in my past. I had sitting on my folding table by the bay a complete set of crime scene photographs of an event that the paperwork itself placed in a future that was now by the calendar very nearly the present. The photographer had stood in that field in flat, overcast light, casting a shadow from a different hour, and made 41 careful prints, far too near context to detail, of a body that, as far as anything I could verify in any record I could reach, had not yet been found, in a season I could not match to any visit anyone had logged. The professional in me reached for the only handle left, the only one that felt like work I knew how to do: find the photographer. 41 prints. This could have a maker, a real human being with hands and an eye and a darkroom. The work was too skilled to be anonymous. The fraternity of scene photographers in this part of the county is small, and it has always been small. There were never more than a handful of us at any time, and we all knew each other, and the old ones trained the ones who trained me, a chain of teaching going back as far as living memory. I could name nearly all of them, the living and the dead. So I started asking, quietly, carefully, the way you ask about a colleague you do not want to seem to be investigating, whether anyone remembered a photographer who had worked the Hessom area in the old numbering days, someone who printed on heavy fiber paper, someone with a particular generous eye for tone, someone good enough that their work would still look like that after all these years. I asked 3 people before I asked Frell, and the 3 of them gave me nothing. Blank looks, no. Before my time. Never heard of a Marrow Field case. But they each, all three, after they said no, paused and asked me why I wanted to know. And there was something in how they asked it, a flatness, a carefulness, that I did not understand until later. Then I went to Frell. An old man named Frell, who had been the county's photographer before there was such a title, before there was a forensic unit at all, who was past 90 and lived with a niece and was sharp only in patches now, the way the very old are sharp, clear as glass about 1962 and lost about this morning. I sat with him in a room that smelled of liniment and old paper, and I described the prints, the flat overcast field, the long shadow that did not match the light, the body near the central rise, the two leaning trees, the canted fence post. I watched him listen. He was quiet for a long while, his hands folded, his eyes somewhere past me, and then he said something I have not been able to put down since, and I do not think I ever will. He said, "You shot Hessom already, didn't you? The bones." I said I had. I had not told him the field was Hessom. I had described the trees and the post, but I had not said the name. I was certain I had not, and I have replayed it many times to be sure. He said, "Then you've already been the shadow. You just haven't gone back yet to cast it." I asked him what he meant. I asked him plainly, twice, and he would not say it plainer, or could not. The patch of clarity already closing over. But what he gave me in pieces over the next half hour, between long silences and a few minutes when he forgot I was there entirely, was this. There had always been a Marrow Field Box. It had been in storage longer than he had been alive, and he was older than the storage, older than the county's whole filing system, which meant the box had simply moved from archive to archive, decade to decade, never entered, never disposed of, always out of sequence wherever it landed. Every scene photographer who worked that part of the county was shown it once, early in their career, by the one who trained them, as a kind of warning, a thing you were meant to see and never touch. He had been shown it. He had shown it to the men he trained, and the prints in it changed. Not all of them, he said. The wide shots stayed the same. The field was always the field, the trees, the post, the swale, all of it constant, year after year. But the figure standing over the body, the shadow at the edge of frame in those 3 close prints, that was different each time someone looked closely. And it was never anyone you could name until afterward, and by the time you could name it, it was you. He said the last man who had been shown the box before me, the man whose name should by rights have been written on the line that said no officer of record, had recognized his own coat in the shadow. A particular coat, Frell said, an oilskin with a torn pocket the man was always meaning to mend. He had recognized it and laughed, the way you laugh, and he had said it was nonsense, an old man's story, and he had driven out to the Hessom Field on a gray afternoon to prove there was nothing there, to stand in the empty grass and feel foolish and drive home. And he had not driven home. They never found him. The case of his disappearance was, Frell said with a small, terrible smile, never properly photographed, because the man who would have photographed it was the man who was gone. I told myself this was an old man's story, the way you tell yourself anything to keep your feet. A hazing tale photographers told the new ones, the way every trade has its ghost, the apprentice's warning, the thing in the darkroom, the negative that develops a face. I told myself the date on the document was a clerical error, a transposed year, a 4 where a 6 should be. I told myself the shadow was a defect in old emulsion, a chemical accident that the brain, hungry for meaning, was reading as a figure. I told myself the missing man had simply left, as men do, walked out of a small county life and started over somewhere warm. I had 4 separate rational explanations, and I held all of them at once, tightly the way you hold 4 ropes in a wind. And you already know that a man holding 4 ropes is a man whose single rope has failed. But I went back to the storage unit the next morning in good light, the space heater ticking, the bay coming in under the door. And I laid out the 3 close prints again, the ones with the shadow, on the clean black cloth. And I looked at the shadow the way I look at light for a living, with a loupe, the way I would examine any anomaly in any print, methodically, to rule it out. And the shadow had changed. I will say that as plainly as I can. When I first found the prints, 3 weeks earlier, the figure casting the shadow had been turned away, indistinct, a dark vertical shape at the edge of the grass with no detail I could resolve, just the long fall of it across the field. Now the figure was turned more toward the camera, not enough to give a face. The resolution of a shadow does not give you a face. A shadow has no features. It is only an outline of light withheld. But an outline is a shape, and the shape had detail now that it had not had. A coat with a particular cut, the skirt of it long, the kind of long coat a man wears in the field in cold weather, a satchel over one shoulder, hanging at the hip the way a camera bag hangs heavy, the strap crossing the body from shoulder to opposite hip, the way I carry my own gear, the way I was taught to carry it 40 years ago, the way my whole trade carries it, because it keeps the weight off your neck and your hands free for the camera. The shadow on the grass in the Hessom Field was the shadow of a scene photographer, standing over a body, satchel crossed over one shoulder, in the wrong light. In a recovery dated 4 years from a timestamp already years in my past. And it was turning slowly, frame by frame, week by week, the way a man turns when he hears something behind him and has not yet decided to look. I will not pretend I solved it. I want to be exact about what I actually know, separated cleanly from what I only fear, because the fear is the easy part and the knowing is the part that might help the next person, and helping the next person is the only reason I am setting any of this down. Here's what I know. I know the photographs are real photographs, made by light falling on silver and paper, not painted, not doubled, not collaged, not faked by any photographic means I can name, and I have named most of the means there are, because naming them is my profession. The grain is right. The tonality is right. The edge detail in the shadow is real light, real grass, real silver. Whatever made them with light. I know the field in them is the Hessom Field, which I have stood in, between the 2 leaning trees, beside the canted post. And I can prove I stood there, because I have my own work order, with my own signature, and my own bright summer photographs of old dry bones. I know the body in the Marrow Field prints is not the body I documented there. Mine was skeletal and old. This one is whole and recent, and I know the document stapled into my own closed file dates this other recovery into a future that has nearly arrived. I know there is no officer of record because the record is not finished. The line is blank because it is waiting for a name, and the box has been waiting, out of sequence, drifting from shelf to shelf, longer than the oldest man alive. Blank in that one line, patient. And I know the shadow is turning. That is the one thing I check, and the one thing I wish I could stop checking. Each time I look, it is turned a little more toward the lens. I do not look anymore unless I have to. But I have to because not knowing where it is turned to is worse than knowing. I have not gone out to the Hessom Field. That is the one thing I have managed not to do. And I am telling you about it precisely so that I keep not doing it, because the impulse is constant and it is reasonable sounding, and it grows stronger every day. It speaks in my own sensible voice. It says, drive out. It is an hour's drive. See for yourself. Stand at the tree line in the empty grass. Prove the field holds nothing. Prove the prints are an old defect and an old man's story. Take your own camera and photograph the empty field in good light and put the whole thing to rest. And every single time I feel the pull of that, I understand a little more clearly what Frell meant when he said, you have already been the shadow, you just haven't gone back yet to cast it, because that drive, the drive out to disprove it, is the shape of the thing itself. The missing man before me made that drive. He laughed at his own coat, and he drove out to prove the nonsense was nonsense. And he stood in the field, and the photographs do not record a recovery that already happened. They record a recovery that happens because a photographer drives out to disprove them and stands in the grass at the wrong hour as the light goes long and gold and something is there or comes to be there. And he makes 41 careful prints, far to near, context to detail, because that is what his hands do. That is the grammar he cannot help speaking. And he casts a long shadow in light that does not belong to the rest of the day. And he never drives home. And his prints become the box. And the box drifts to a shelf and waits, blank in the line where his name should go, for the next photographer to be shown it and feel the small, clean, reasonable pull to go and look. The box is not documenting a scene. I am as certain of this as I am of anything now. The box is recruiting a photographer. The scene does not exist out in that field in any settled past. It exists only as a record waiting to be made true. And it can only be made true by a person with the training and the satchel and the eye to make it. By someone who will go out and stand in the right place and do the work without being able to stop, because the work is in the hands, and the hands do not ask permission. The making of the record is the dying in it. The body in the grass is the photographer. The shadow is the photographer too. The same man twice, the one lying down and the one standing over himself with the camera, recording his own recovery. Because that is the only kind of scene that needs no officer of record, the kind where the officer and the recovered are the same person, and the record makes itself by making him go. I have done two things, and I do not know if either is right, and I have time to do little else but wonder. I have not entered the Marrow Field Box into the new electronic system. It is the one box from all those shelves that I have left undigitized, sitting by itself resealed, with my initials nowhere on it, because to scan it is to certify it, to log it with my name as the person who processed it, to write myself into its chain of custody. And I will not put my name anywhere near that box, in any line, for any reason, least of all in the line it has kept open for so long. Let it stay analog. Let it stay paper and silver. Paper at least cannot copy itself out to 100 terminals in the night. Paper stays in the box, and the box stays on the shelf. And as long as no one finishes it, perhaps it cannot finish anyone. And I have written this, and I am leaving it folded inside the lid of that box, taped over the manifest, over the line that says no officer of record, so that whoever is hired next to clear those shelves finds this before they lay out the prints, before they reach the 3 close frames, before they bring the loupe to the shadow, before they feel the small, clean, reasonable pull to drive an hour out to a field outside Hessom and stand at a break in the tree line between 2 leaning trees. In flat, overcast light that they will tell themselves will stay flat and prove to themselves that nothing is there. Do not go and look. That is the whole of it. That is everything I have distilled to the one instruction that might save you. The field is empty until you stand in it. The body is no one until the photographer arrives. The light stays flat and gray until the moment it does not. Until it goes long and gold from an hour that is not the hour you arrived in. And by then your hands are already raising the camera, and the grammar is already speaking through you, far to near. Context to detail, and the shadow you are casting across the grass is already turning toward a lens that no one is holding. The wide shots never change. The field is always the field. The 2 trees, the leaning post, the dark swale where the water gathers. It is only the figure that is undecided, and it has been undecided for longer than anyone can remember, and it is waiting with great patience and in beautiful, beautiful light to find out who you are.